Welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and it's spoiler season once again, I guess. It really never almost ends. We're getting Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth cards out now, which of course is a crossover set with Lord of the Rings. I'm sure everyone is very familiar with it. I've read a couple of books. I have obviously watched the movies, as most people have. I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings guy, but I'm definitely familiar with most of what's going on. I am going to get into the commanders, but there's a specific reason why I'm not talking about any of the legendary creatures that have come out yet, because that's usually what I do in these spoiler videos. I'll get to that later, though. I'm going to talk about one card in particular because it's a iconic, not an iconic card because it's never been a card before. It's an iconic thing in Lord of the Rings, which is now a card, and I think it is going to be a very impactful one in the format. So let's take a look at it. The One Ring, right? Of course, this is very, very important for, I guess, the Lord of the Rings franchise in general, and maybe, I guess, probably the most important non-character in the whole series. And of course, they had to make it into a magic card, and of course, it is a legendary artifact. What else would it be, right? 4 mana legendary artifact, has indestructible, which of course, you know, it would be neat if they put something on there where you could destroy it only with, you know, what you got to put it in the fires of Mount Doom, right? So anyway, maybe there'll be a flavor thing that comes out there. I thought they did pretty good with the flavor on this card. So it is indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. That's pretty great. So obviously they did the cast trigger thing there. You sort of have to do that because you can get into a situation like in a Brago deck, you could very easily just blink this every single turn and then perpetually have protection from everything, which is going to make it hard for you to lose the game. Obviously protection from everything, meaning you can't be, I mean, says you gain protection from everything. So that means you can't be targeted. You can't be, I mean, you can't have any auras on you. So there's that. You can't take any damage from anything, right? So it's going to protect against pretty much, it would be really hard to lose the game. There are ways to do it, getting around protection. I actually talked about this in one of my rules videos. Even something like Teferi's protection where you think you're completely safe, there are ways around that. You gain protection from everything into your next turn. That's pretty nice. You could build around that a little. You do have to cast it. Interestingly enough, the blinking thing does work here sort of with the other abilities. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring. Okay, and obviously the last ability plays into that. Tap, put a burden counter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring. So this is just a pretty darn good colorless card draw option. And funny enough, one of the reasons I'm making this video, and I actually had a guy, because I did my colorless options video, which came out with, I mean, it came out today, which is when I'm making this video, but you guys won't be seeing this probably till the next day. I had a guy comment on that video, hey, gotta add the One Ring to this list, right, for your colorless options. And this is a really fantastic colorless card draw option. Maybe the best, I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on what you're doing in your deck. Now, obviously you pay 4 mana for this. It's indestructible, which is great. It's going to be hard for your opponents to get rid of it. They're going to have to use a farewell will exile it. Obviously, if you hit artifacts, Return to Dust is a pretty popular removal spell in the format that will get rid of this. You know, Anguished Unmaking, you would need an exile effect. And there's not a ton of exile effects for artifacts in the format, at least not ones that are typically used. So that's good. The fact that you get protection from everything until your next turn is just really neat and handy. And yes, you can also use that just to save your life if you want to, right? There is a situation where you might want to just hold this in your hand later in the game rather than playing it right away because you are concerned about your opponent playing a Craterhoof Behemoth or something like that, right? So that actually can come into a lot of use, and we might see people trying to abuse this card in that way. The interesting thing here is if you are returning it to your hand so you can cast it again, right, which is where you might want to use this. You know, you could get into a situation with Master Transmuter, for example. I'm already coming up with combos here. Master Transmuter will return an artifact to your hand and put one into play. So you could get into a loop there where you're constantly returning it to your hand and putting it into play. I guess you have to cast it. So you'd have to return it with your Master Transmuter and then actually cast it. But it's only 4 mana. And gaining protection from everything perpetually is totally worth 4 mana, right? So you can get into some loops there. We might see some people doing that. The other interesting thing is it will get rid of the counters, obviously, right? If you get a bunch, you draw with this for a while, and then you get like 5 counters on it. Now it's like, okay, I don't really want to lose a bunch of life on my upkeep, so I can return it to my hand and then cast it again, getting rid of the counters so I can reset it. So that's the other part that fits with that strategy, right? But just on its face, this is a pretty darn good card draw option, right? I'm going to pay 4 mana, tap it to draw a card. Now, that's 4 mana draw card's terrible, obviously, but funny enough, I'm going to make a video coming out pretty soon where, for me, permanents are better in the long run, especially if they're indestructible because they're hard to get rid of, right? If I'm casting a one shot as far as card draw goes, and I'm actually probably going to make a few videos about card draw coming up that are all going to tie into each other. If I have a spell that casts that draws me cards, like a one shot, and a one shot obviously is typically going to be an instant or sorcery, I really want to get a lot of bang for my buck. I don't like the draw spells that are only going to net you 1 card or even 2 cards. Cost is not so much an issue for me as is I'm getting lots of value out of it in the long run. If I cast a sorcery that's going to draw me cards, I want to get at least 4 cards off of it. I don't care so much about the cost. It's more about the card advantage. And permanence sort of translates the same way. I mean, if I'm putting any card in my commander deck, it's a singleton format. If I put any card in my commander deck, I want to get some bang for my buck. I want to get a lot out of it. And this you certainly can, because you're going to cast it. It's indestructible, so it won't get removed very easily. You get that nice little added bonus of protection from everything until your next turn. And then you can sit there drawing. Obviously, it has a tap ability, so you can get into some more shenanigans here with the untapping scenario, where you can even draw even more cards, right? And this is where things get tricky. You can remove counters so that you don't lose the life, right? So if you, in any theme where you are manipulating counters, again, it gets really interesting, right? You're going to tap this, put a burden counter on it, then draw a card for each burden counter on the one ring. So how many people are going to put this in the proliferate decks? And of course, Atrax is the most popular commander in the entire format. So there's maybe an include there. We got a whole bunch of more interesting proliferate commanders in the last set. So maybe you want to be proliferating and adding counters to this. Losing 2, 3, 4 life is, that can get pretty intense after a while, but I think it's entirely worth it in an Atraxa deck to play this, tap it immediately to put a counter on it and draw a card, right? You're getting the 1 card draw right away. Then on your end step, you proliferate with your Atraxa, put another burden counter on it. Now on your upkeep, you're going to lose 2 life, and then tap it, because now it has 2 counters on it, tap it, put another counter on it, and you're going to draw 3 cards. So you're essentially sort of skipping the evens there, right? And you're going to get, so second use, I'm already drawing 3 cards off of it. That seems pretty good, right? Ultimately, this is a card. I mean, first of all, it is a iconic, item. I don't know what it's not a character, right? It's an iconic thing that everyone is very familiar with. All of the Lord of the Rings fans, and I'm sure there's a lot of really hardcore Lord of the Rings fans that play Magic the Gathering. I'm sure there's a lot of crossover there, right? Just like with Dungeons and Dragons. I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to throw this in at least one of their decks just to say they have it, right? It's one of those cards that I think people are going to want to play just because it is this iconic thing. Also, though, it is just a pretty good card. For me, I like a card when I'm getting into the fundamentals of my deck building thing. When I have a card in my deck, I like that card to be good early in the game and also good late in the game. I don't want to draw a card like a Soul Ring, for example. You draw a Soul Ring off the top of your deck on turn 8. It's like, it's seems really good early in the game. Later in the game, not so much though, right? And I say the same thing about removal. The Swords to Plowshares is fantastic on turn 1. It's also fantastic on turn 10, right? This is a card that on turn 4, assuming you play it as soon as you can play it, maybe turn 3, pretty good. Play it, immediately draw a card, right? You would have to be careful or if you play it early in the game, because you get up to like 3 counters on here. And I love the flavor. Again, the flavor here is phenomenal. They really hit it out of the park with the flavor, because it's all about the greed, right? That's the whole idea of the One Ring, is the power I can get out of it. And it's sort of like Sylvan Library that way, right? You see people with a Sylvan Library and they just get greedy. They're just paying the 8 life every time just so they can draw the cards. This is very similar that way, where it's, okay, I got 5 counters on this already. I'm losing 5 life on my upkeep, but I can just very easily tap this to draw 6 cards. Oh, I love the flavor, but also sort of the mind games it plays with you. I mean, they really did a great job with this. We're like, okay, well, I want to draw cards with this, but then it's going to put another counter on it. I'm going to lose more life. Really, really did a great. The more I think about it, the more I'm like, man, they really hit it out of the park with the flavor on this card. So great job there with the flavor. Again, I think this card's going to see play alone for the reason that it is this iconic thing that a lot of people are very familiar with. But also, I think it's actually a pretty good, colorless card draw option for sure. Again, you have that added bonus of the protection. This could definitely slot into a lot of decks, like those mono white decks that don't draw cards very well. I think they're doing just fine. I mean, it depends on if you need help or not. If you need help with card draw in your deck, this is a great option to just easily slot into your deck. No problem, right? So definitely going to be a card that we are going to see in the format, no question. How much? Hard to say. Again, the flavor of it and the iconic nature of it might play more into it. It usually does in the Commander format, right? People tend to play cards in the Commander format that they just love, not necessarily the best cards. So that's going to play into it as well. They did a great job on this, I'll say. I'm not the hugest Lord of the Rings fan ever, but I am familiar with it, and they really did a bang up job with this card, and it is certainly going to see play in the format. You guys let me know what you think of this card in the comments below. Future spoilers for Lord of the Rings coming up, but that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.